I'm going to begin this morning with an informal survey. This will be a show of hands survey. How many of you have ever prayed the prayer Jesus taught saying, "Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us"? Okay. How about forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us? Okay. And then forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. How many of you have prayed something else? Anybody else use a different word than sins or debts or trespasses? What? Can you tell us what word you used? Any other words that we've used for those words we frequently say? Okay. How many of you ever wondered what these words even mean anyway? Anybody? Few? Most of you know. Okay, good. Won't have to preach this sermon then, I guess. Growing up in rural northwestern Pennsylvania, where there were many farms and where hunting was hugely popular, no trespassing signs were everywhere. And I grew up knowing very well what these signs meant. As a young child then, I would go to church and sit on Sunday mornings where we prayed, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." And I would remember those signs and wonder, what does this mean? What are we praying about? I don't remember anyone ever explaining that to me. And then a little later, I learned sometimes in some places, some people prayed, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." And by this time, I knew something about loans and borrowing and paying back and interest. I was being socialized into the economics of our society, but still I was puzzled about how debts and debtors had anything to do with this prayer and what actually did this mean. Again, I don't remember anyone ever explaining this to me. In several settings these days, this phrase in the prayer Jesus taught is often prayed, "Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us." I'm not sure that we know what that means either, even though I think most of us believe that we do know what this one means and we do understand. A few minutes ago, you heard varying translations of this verse as it's recorded in Matthew. And even our four Gospels and other accounts of this prayer, written at different times and in different contexts, using different language and in different settings, give different meaning to this verse. Over time, in the early decades of Christianity, biblical scholars see a shifting from the concept of what was a literal debt to the term sin. However, many of these scholars are quite convinced that when Jesus prayed, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors," he quite literally meant debt, referring to someone owing something to someone else, perhaps what we owe to God, maybe what one person owes to another person, and how others may have become indebted to us. The uneasiness that some have with the idea of debt, as it is used here instead of trespasses or sins, might be because it is difficult as it is for us to look at the little things we do or don't do as we go about our daily lives, and then try to be nicer people. This kind of personal reflection and personal correction is a whole lot easier than seriously assessing the systemic evil in our world. A whole lot easier than spending our lives transforming public policy, entire educational systems, local, national, and global economies, power imbalances in employment practices in the political realm. Just focusing on individual transformation is a whole lot easier than transforming whole societies. And this shifting away from the use of debts in the prayer Jesus taught takes place in more recent times as well. In the late 1970s, Latin America's foreign debt was impacting the lives of pretty much everyone living there in devastating ways. Franz Hinkelmert, a Latino liberation theologian, notes that it was during this time some ministers, Catholic and Protestant alike, began to change the words of the prayer Jesus taught from "forgive us our debts" to "forgive us our offenses," or "forgive us our sins," or "forgive us our trespasses." The reason for the changes? There was a strong fear that Christians trapped in a cycle of poverty by policies of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund might actually take the prayer literally, might actually believe what it said, and demand that debts be forgiven so that they could indeed have their daily bread. There is a reluctance to understand and live into the meaning of the Jesus prayer. When Jesus teaches disciples to pray for forgiveness for themselves and about forgiving others, he means much more than daily, petty, little acts on the part of individuals. Jesus' original intent and meaning is about literal debts. Jesus is not using debt as a metaphor for sin. Jesus' prayer is about what we owe to God, what others owe to us, what we owe to someone else. Now, have you ever noticed how sometimes someone offers to do something for you, but there's some sort of string attached? Something keeping you indebted to them? Some dynamic set up so that you always and forever owe them something, with some obligation always looming over the relationship? Or remember those times you did something for someone else, and though you actually never said it, you rather expected they now owe you a favor in return. You might have even said, "You owe me," somewhat jokingly, but perhaps not as jokingly if the truth really be told. "You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours" is rampant in the world of politics, leading to in-groups and out-groups, distrust and mismanagement, side deals and corruption. Even church and denominational politics are not immune to giving with strings attached. Do you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of deals, to in-groups and out-groups, and to power imbalances. In this country, we're still in the midst of the impact of issues of debt, mortgages and foreclosures, credit card debt, corporate debt, debt among nations. When debt and the effects of debt get out of hand, whether individually or corporately or globally, especially today with our intricately intertwined global economies, the adjustments that need to be made to get back on track are complicated and extremely complex. In the Hebrew community of early Israel, there were what we might call regulatory laws to prevent injustice and gross imbalance in the community as a result of debt. By law, no one was allowed to charge interest to members of the community who needed assistance. One member of the community was not allowed to benefit from the misfortune or need of another. Now, this disallowance of interest seems not to have applied to loans for commercial purposes. Loans with interest seem to be acceptable in business arrangements, but not acceptable if somebody's needing help. Still, though, when the economic system works in such a way that the whole system becomes unbalanced, when the distribution of sharing of the resources of God's world is not fair and just so that everyone has enough, when the gap between the rich and the poor grows larger and larger until the chasm between groups of God's children separates and divides, leaving some consumed with greed, while others live under constant stress and pressure, trying to make ends meet, or even struggling just to survive, perhaps eventually completely giving up. When things get to this point, something has to be done.